Hello, everybody. How's it going? This is your captain speaking, and welcome back to another episode of Minecraft Talks. So, I'm going to keep this real short and simple. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about car dependency, and it's basically going to be a video essay with Minecraft in the background, as that's how I've decided to do it. So, a little sneak peek back there, I'm not going to show anymore. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump into it. Again, we're talking about car dependency and its effects on society. So, let's go. So, let's jump right in. Today, like I said, we're going to be talking about car dependency in the US / North America. Maybe even the whole world, but mostly in the US. So, I've been wanting to make this video for a while, but let's just jump in. So, car dependency, what is it? So, car dependency, as the name suggests, is when people are or become dependent on their cars to get around and do their daily life. So, I guess for all my North American viewers, just ask yourself, if you need to go to work, what is the first thing you have to do? If you need to get bread at the store, what is the first thing you have to do? And let's say if you're going to visit a friend, what's the first thing you have to do? It's very likely that all of these questions were answered with the first thing you must do is get in your car. And that kind of highlights that we need a car, or we have become dependent on cars to go about our daily lives. And that has a myriad of effects on just how we kind of interact with society, interact with our cities, and just all sorts of things, which I'll kind of touch on. So, car dependency. Cars have not been around forever. They appeared in the beginning of the 19th or 20th century, the second half of the Industrial Revolution, with like Henry Ford, all of that jazz. Where it really ramped up was in the post-war years of the US. So, World War II has just ended. Cars were, prior to this, pretty much like a luxury item. But they were getting in the hands of just more regular, everyday people, as our systems have developed, had developed enough to where they were cheaper to make, cheaper to assemble, faster, more easily accessible. So, because of this, a bunch of grants and everything went out to build a bunch of roads, like the interstate highway system, and emerged a new way of living called the suburbs. So traditionally, you either had rural areas, you had urban areas, and suburbs also existed. Rural obviously being very far out, you have easy accessible to nature, probably own a lot of land, and you're far away from commercial or commerce centers. Urban being the exact opposite. Land is not easily accessible, so people tend to live in kind of tighter packed, not as big of areas. Not to say that you can't own a house in an urban setting, it's just it will cost more. But the kind of turn of that is you're close to everything, life is a lot faster, you're kind of closer to the action, and it's easier to meet up with people, which, depending on what stage in life, that can be great. We need all of these things. Having options is great. So, this new suburb, though, as I said, suburbs did exist in the past. Just now that we all have kind of easier ways to get around cars independently, we don't need to rely on public transportation or anything like that. We can simply hop in our car, get on these new roads, and drive into the city. So what did that open up? It opened up a lot of people being able to work in the cities, but buy a home and land on the outskirts of the cities. So you kind of got the best of both worlds. 1950s to 1960s, you kind of saw a lot of this happening. Just people owning single-family homes. They have their car. They raise their family out there. The iconic white picket fence is born. And this is pretty much the beginning, or the image at least, of the American dream. I'll show a picture of Levitt-style suburbs. The first one being Levittown, turning what would be farmland into a suburban development as we know it in modern terms. So, again, I think all of these places are good to exist. It's just how they've developed over the years, and now in 2024, what the effects that we see of this, as this is a relatively new thing in the grand scheme of history, as cars did not exist before. So we have kind of the suburbification of the outskirts. What was once kind of rural areas outside of city centers now becomes suburbs. And suburbs were pretty cheap. Again, everyone kind of owned cars. Cars were accessible. It kind of became a right to drive rather than a luxury. So everyone was able to drive. And the land outside the cities was cheap. So everyone went to the suburbs. They bought these lands and they raised their cities. And I'm very much simplifying everything that we'll be talking about today, as I am no scholar on this. I'm simply just talking about what I've observed, my anecdotal experience, what I've watched, what I've heard, and what I've read. There's many other factors that have influenced how today is, but again, I'm simplifying, as this isn't my PhD thesis. This is a YouTube video. So, again, people just kind of moved to the cities then, or moved to the suburbs. And you had a whole new class and kind of societies building on the outside of the cities. You didn't live in the cities anymore, you worked in the cities, and then after you left them to go to the suburbs. So this had a lot of effects. Codependency. Some of the effects on, there's really three ways that I've listed here. I broke it down into three ways, how codependency affects just society. So it has affected community, the health of people, and it has also affected the economy. So let's start with the community aspect. So again, cars greatly enable us to travel large distances very fast and independently. We don't have to wait on anything. We simply hop in our car and go. Then how did this affect cities and your community within the city? Well, when you have these densely kind of packed in areas where people live dense in an urban environment, for people to drive in from the suburbs to get to where they work in the cities, you have to build roads. And what these roads essentially did was fractured some of these neighborhoods and communities in half. So I mentioned earlier the interstate highway system, and this was a massive project undertaken by the US in the mid-centuries of last century. And obviously we see the benefits of that, but what happened is it sliced up many of these communities in half in these neighborhoods. And if you lived on one side of the highway, it was super hard to get to the other side, or maybe to get where you worked. So that kind of limited your ability to kind of transport yourself. Let's say prior you lived in the city and you were able to walk to work, and now there is a highway in the middle of you and your work. you're more likely to have to buy a car now to drive or find a different way to get there that is much longer. So, communities split in half and kind of separated. And a lot of this was done based on, again, I'm super complicating or super simplifying, but much of this was done based on race and economic status, all sorts of things, redlining, and this process was usually called urban renewal. And there's a lot of effects of urban renewal. That is a whole nother rabbit hole that I will not touch on in this video, but these are kind of, this is what was happening in that time period and what they're called. So, another effect of car dependency would be affecting the health of everybody in society. So, in a dense urban environment, you're usually walking around, doing everything. Well, now everyone's in cars, and you're not moving, you're simply sitting. So, people aren't as active anymore. You get in your car, you drive somewhere, you park right in front of it, you walk inside. There's not much activity involved. So, an immediate effect of car dependency is of just people not moving as much as they used to or as much as we need. Let's say you go to Europe. I lived in Spain, for example. I lived in Madrid. And you walk around, and that's just kind of a way of life. Here, it's much different because everyone needs to drive everywhere because that's how we've organized our cities. We've organized them kind of sprawling, spread apart, and because of that, we don't get as much exercise as we need, and it affects like the stereotype of Americans. I'm not going to say it, but we all know what it is. So, and then a second side effect of on the health due to car dependency is just pollution. We have more exhaust in the air. If you live alongside a major busy road, you're gonna have worse health problems. That's kind of just the fact of it. You're gonna have exhaust fumes. You're gonna have tire particles in the air. You're gonna have noise pollution. There's a myriad of consequences to this phenomenon of car dependency that have manifested nowadays. In the past, it probably wasn't as bad. There were less cars on the road. 70, 80 years later, there's a ton of cars on the road, and it's just kind of how we do it. Like, a family of 5 might own like 7 cars. Like, it's not uncommon. So, and then also the health of nature. Because of car dependency and kind of the suburbification of our cities, we just sprawl out. We use way more space than we historically did, and because of that, our urban centers, the ability to get to nature from an urban center, it's going to be a lot harder than in the past because now there's miles and miles, kilometers and kilometers of suburbs in between the cities and nature. So that's a big one that should not be understated. It also impacts the environment. And lastly, effects on the economy. So again, I'm no professor in this. I'm simply a guy doing YouTube that has a passion for these things. But this kind of ties back into the suburbification of cities. So what were the economic effects of everybody moving to the suburbs? So you had these densely packed cities, neighborhoods, and everyone kind of moved to the suburbs and vacated these parts of the cities. So what happened? Your tax base went with it. They moved out of the county, out of the city. So what was once a densely packed area, a lively street, that was able to sustain corner stores, local businesses, all sorts of things, now have moved far away. And because of that, the cities lost much of their internal revenue, their tax base. And they began to kind of decay a little bit because, again, everything was going out to the city or to the suburbs. There's much more to that. It kind of partially plays into the fact that now chains and big box stores are much more prevalent than a mom and pop shop or a local store, mostly because that's just the most convenient thing you can drive to. You can't just walk down the street and buy something from a local business. If you have to get in your car, you may as well do a one-stop shop. And that's kind of the facts of it. Also, economically, because cars have become the #1 way to get around, and honestly the only option to get around. If you're in a rural area, of course that makes sense. If you're in a suburban area, it makes more sense. Even if you're in an urban area, cars tend to be one of the main options to get around, unless you live in like the Northeast, New York, Philadelphia. Any city built before the automobile will have other options. But if you go out west to any city built post World War II, basically, your main option of getting around, even in an urban core, is going to be the car. And what does this have? What effect does this have economically on people? Well, in case you didn't know, cars are rather expensive. They're expensive to buy, they're expensive to maintain, and you always have to fill them with gas. So, who does this kind of unevenly impact? It impacts lower income people, because you're less likely to buy a consistently working car. You're probably going to buy whatever you can afford. And if this car breaks down, suddenly you can't get to work, you can't see your friends, you can't buy food. And this hinders economic mobility, one of the key components of the American dream. If you can't go to work or you spend your whole paycheck on your car, are you driving to make money? Are you making money to drive? That kind of becomes a little paradox of sorts. So car dependency definitely affects the economy. Again, I think options are a good thing, but whenever the only option is to drive, it kind of skews things and disrupts the natural balance of how we've developed land and cities for millennia. So, again, when people moved out of city cores into the suburbs, it greatly affected the tax bases of these cities and their ability to pay for and maintain things. Like, now you have to maintain and spend money on all of these roads, which will fall apart in about 40 years. And if your tax base isn't big enough to pay for all this, it's a constant deficit on the city. And it's been proven, and there's pretty cool metrics out there, that older city cores still perform better financially than newer box stores do. Because even though a place like, I don't know, Best Buy, Walmart, anything like that, may make more revenue, it still costs more to maintain and all this infrastructure needed to support this style of development, which is a drain on city finances. And again, you may not have seen that in the 1970s and 80s, but in the 2020s, we're starting to see it. And who knows, by 2020 or 2050, who knows what this will manifest as. So, this kind of leads us to my home city of St. Louis. So again, I want to really hit home here that the history of St. Louis is super complicated. I am uber simplifying everything that happens. And again, I might be wrong on some things. I'm not perfect. But I'll kind of go through St. Louis because I'm biased towards it, I really love St. Louis. It has a really unique charm, kind of like New Orleans does. And none of the sad parts of what happened to the city. So, St. Louis was a pre-automobile city. It held major importance in the past, with like the World's Fair and everything. It was a major hub of the country. And 100 years later, it does not hold this level of importance. And I went on a deep dive of looking into many things as to why. I learned things from it, which is pretty cool. So before I begin, I really want to shout out builtstlouis.net. It is an old website from like 2003 that is super rich on old buildings, which 20 years ago he documented just kind of the history of these buildings. Many of them are abandoned. Today, many of them are not standing. So it's really sad to see a lot of our history kind of disappear before our eyes. But I just want to shout out Built St. Louis. I'll link it down below. Check it out. Super cool resource, treasure trove of information, and I'll be referencing a lot of the pictures and everything else here, as it's very articulate on kind of what I'm saying, and he did this 20 years ago. So, St. Louis really suffered a lot with the urban renewal. We built interstates through the middle of our city, like one going straight through Busch Stadium, like a downtown interstate. So, I'll start with some buildings. So one cool thing about having an old city that has held importance in the past is that we get very unique and cool stock of historical buildings. And it is our responsibility to maintain and take care of these buildings as they're handed down to us. It would be like, I don't know, I'm going back to Madrid because I live there. Not taking care of like the Palacio de Cibeles because you just decide not to, you know? It's handed down to you. You have to take care of these things because if not, they will disappear before your eyes. So let's start with the Marquette NX building. So this is an old turn-of-the-century office building. As you can see in this picture, there's like old buggies, carriages outside. So pretty cool, pretty significant. I believe the picture's from 1915. And it was demolished at, I believe 1998, something like that. And what they decided to replace it with was a parking garage. And this kind of highlights the bigger theme of this is it's kind of bigger theme not only for St. Louis but kind of for North America. It's rather short-sightedness for we want to be a modern city and we totally should be a modern city, but you kind of have to take care of and respect what you have in front of you, what you were handed down. Now this building was abandoned. It sat empty for many years. And it kind of comes back to the fact that when everyone left the city to go to the suburbs, a lot of the industry and tax base went with it. People simply weren't living in the city anymore. So we get this suburban style housing, which, you know, what's the difference between Phoenix and Maine when it comes to the suburbs? Not really much, because the housing kind of looks the same. But here you have very elaborate, cool buildings, which were unfortunately torn down for a parking garage, exemplifying how the city has now turned into a place that's less livable and only a place where you drive to work and then leave. only exacerbating the circumstances that the city is in. And this happens all over the US and North America, Canada. But again, I'm biased. I'm talking about St. Louis here because it's my home city. So the next building would be the Ambassador Building. So what the Ambassador Building was an old theater, very cool, built in the style of like the Spanish Renaissance, and it definitely turned heads when you went in. You felt dignified by it, and was definitely like a gem of the city. So this was destroyed again, late 1990s, early 2000s. And what replaced this building is a driveway for a bank, or an urban plaza as they call it, even though it has no seats. No one really hangs out in this place. So what we lost was a gem of St. Louis that held a lot of history. It held cultural significance, that cultural capital that you really can't get back. And now it's replaced with a driveway. Again, further just hitting on the theme of just car dependency. This is a very car dependent city, and these are some of the effects of it. We lose important places that hold a lot of cultural importance, and they're filled with non-places. They're filled with places that no one really appreciates. It doesn't dignify you. It doesn't inspire you. You don't want to sit and look at it. You don't want to meet around and kind of gawk at it. It's a non-place. It's like a hallway. You aren't going to hang out in the hallway. You go to the room. So yeah, that's a sad loss for the city, the Ambassador Building. The next building is the Century Building. So the Century Building, I believe, was an old hotel at one point. I know it had some stores on the bottom levels. I'm unsure exactly, but it was a very regal looking building across from the old post office. And one important thing to note about these old buildings is that together they are stronger. Together they resonate with each other, and a context is built. You need context to kind of understand the setting you're in, and this is what gives a uniqueness to a place. A uniqueness that makes people want to come back and that makes people remember where they are. So the Century Building, again in kind of short-sightedness, there was many groups that tried to save it, ultimately failed. I was like a child when this happened, so again, this is a fight that has long passed. I'm simply reading up on the history of it all, of a place that I call home. So the Century Building, as you can see, was replaced by a parking garage again. This parking garage is not elaborate, it's not special, it is quite frankly an eyesore. You have a very regal looking old post office in front of it, an urban plaza, other cool buildings around it, and there was really no need to destroy it. Essentially what it's done is it's created a dead space right in the middle of your city, right in your city center. This does not create a fostering environment for a dense urban environment. This creates kind of a suburb. This only exacerbates the suburbanification of urban cores that we see happening in the US. So really sad loss. The Century Building. Pour one out. Put an F in the chat for the Century Building. In all seriousness, no. In all seriousness, though, the fact that they replaced these structures with parking garages is kind of a slap to the face and disrespectful to the citizens of the city. If you want your society to be dignified, build dignifying places. Next place, a bit of kind of Art Deco modernism, the A.S. Allo Company building. Pretty unique building. It was an old, like, I believe, warehouse for medical supplies. And as this website is it's a little dated, it mentions how this style of building is in danger in the US because it is not old enough to be considered historic, but is not new enough to have that same sparkle as something new would have. And ultimately, it lasted like 40 years. It was destroyed in the 90s, I believe. And here's a picture on Google Earth of what it looks like today, and it is simply a parking lot. So again, it sat empty. It's a shame it sat empty because, you know, it deteriorates, but it only goes to the bigger theme of when your cities become suburbanified, I'm creating words, things like this will happen, and you'll kind of lose these places. So, another F in the chat for the A.S. Allo Company. This is kind of a similar style to Busch Stadium 2, a pretty cool concrete, like modernist building. I'll include a picture. It was torn down for a more modern building, or a stadium, but buildings like these are endangered, and you know, if we don't kind of, I get taste change. You might think it's ugly as sin, but they used to think that about Victorian buildings, and now Victorian buildings are seen as super cool. So again, taste change, and you kind of have to protect these places to realize the value in them later on, for later generations, as, I don't know, these things, they're important. So, lastly, I'm just going to include one more building as I thought it was super cool. The Page Avenue Police Station, or Page Boulevard, whatever you want to call it. So this is just an old police station. It suffered a fire where the roof collapsed in. Super cool looking building. I kind of want to build something similar to it in this Minecraft world because I thought it was super cool. Really a shame. I think they tore it down in 2002. Even though someone said it was still sturdy, they could have restored it. But they tore it down maybe because it was a danger, but either way, it no longer exists, and buildings like this just won't come back. You know, we have new styles of building things, and you can't replicate it. So, another big loss for St. Louis, and it's the loss of buildings like these that kind of make it lose what makes it unique in the eyes of the world and other people. So, these were just some of the old buildings that were destroyed. There's many more and what replaced them. The police station was replaced with a small park, for example. But I'll now show a kind of to wrap this up actually, put a nice bow on everything. I'll talk about 1900 Montgomery Street. So again, these pictures are 20 some years old, and I'm talking about them now because I just discovered them, but super cool to kind of look back in time and compare it to the present. So Montgomery Street, a place in, I believe, North St. Louis. Never really the richest area, but close to the railroads and built in that iconic red brick. And these buildings, I should say, are meant to be accompanied by others. They work best together as their row homes. I will include a clip of walking down a street in Lavapiés in Madrid to kind of compare. But these houses kind of work together and it creates a nice cityscape. It's like a live, bustling place. I'll show a map of how it looked before and how it looks today. But whenever these houses and buildings are built close together like this, You have corner stores on the sides. It creates a lively urban environment. You can walk to places, you can buy things. Your social chemistry is good. You're able to easily meet up with people. It's dense, which promotes good public transit, which means your social mobility is better. You're able to climb the social ladder economically and, again, with status. And unfortunately, because everyone kind of fled to the suburbs, again, in that time period, that urban renewal, they were left abandoned and kind of decayed and fell apart. The bones are there, but they aren't being followed. So here's a picture of a new suburban house on one of these old streets of Montgomery. You see how out of place it looks. You see how much it takes up a lot more space. The car is out front. You have the garage. There's workarounds to these, but it's not taking into account the history and where you are. You know, that this is an urban place that is being turned into a suburban place. A suburban place that does not value walkable. It's not built for humans. It values car-centric mobility, and it will only exacerbate the problems of the city. And again, this is not a St. Louis specific problem. This happens all over the US. I'm simply mentioning St. Louis because this is the city I decided to do the research on. So this picture was, I believe, taken in 2003. Let's go to the Google Street View and look at, I believe 2022 is when they took this. So I'll include that here. So again, to kind of wrap things up, car dependency has a lot of effects on your community, your health, and the economy of your urban places. It's kind of we're at a crossroads now. I believe there's a push in the 2020s to kind of reverse the damages done by car dependency. And again, I'm not calling for a ban on these things. I think options are wonderful, but when the only option is to drive, it limits you, and it limits society. And it makes us build plain and mundane places, like that suburban house on Montgomery Street. That house could be built, that could be Washington State. It could be Arizona. It could be Minnesota. It could be Florida. Or it could be Maine. There is no character. There is no uniqueness. And it is, whenever a place has a unique kind of soul to it, like these row homes, anything like that, that is when people come back. That's when people remember your street, or remember your city, and it gives unique flair. There's a reason why people travel all over the world to see places like New Orleans. It's because it was built and preserves this urban style of living. There's a reason why people from all over North America travel to Europe, because they want to experience a truly walkable urban center. So we kind of have to make the switch from making our urban places suburban, keep our suburbs, keep our cities, have options and freedom of transportation, whether that be walking, public transportation, bikes, or driving. And we can start to make beautiful places that dignify society and that will reflect back in society. Again, I'm not an expert on this. I am just a lowly person that makes a few YouTube videos and plays Minecraft. But I'm passionate about it, and I really want to see these places thrive. I love my country. I want to see it go in positive directions. So, Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I'll pass it back. Thanks for listening. Ciao. Alrighty. So, if you guys have made it this far in the episode, really want to say just thank you, as it was quite a lot. So I'm going to make this quick, as it was a long episode overall. So, that was the episode on car dependency, and in the background of that, you probably saw clips of me making this, and I thought it would be rather ironic to end the episode with a single family home, white and all. So, we got this little house here. I thought it would be just kind of funny. It's kind of like the houses in the pictures in the video. And complete with the car and all, as it is an episode on car dependency, I thought that would be a great little addition. I actually had a lot of fun making this house, as I think it kind of fits in, ironically. And my mega base, planning on having it go here, and we will have a neighbor right here. So I think that's pretty cool. I grabbed this car design off Pinterest, so it's pretty cool. Going into the house, right now it doesn't have an interior, as the episode's already long enough, but got the garage here, everything, and the house all decorated. Probably put the smoothies in there. So, but yeah, so to kind of commemorate the episode, as it is my longest one, and it's a video episode, or essay, I put a lot of effort into it, I'm going to add the license plate, episode 6, car dependency. And I think that's a great addition to this all. Add a little license plate to it, kind of commemorate it all, and yeah, just kind of wrap it all up. So, I hope you all enjoyed this. I enjoyed the process. Yeah. So, again, thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, really thank you a lot. I really appreciate it, as a lot of effort went into this episode. And if you believe the episode deserves a like, go ahead and leave one. Leave a comment, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And yeah, until next time, have a good one. Ciao.